In our story today, we've met 3 young Hebrew men. Thank you, Marcus, for reading that out so well. They are part of the contingent of God's people who have been captured and taken into exile in Babylon. And these young men, along with their mate Daniel, have excelled themselves in the court of the Babylonian rulers. They're given new Babylonian names. My granddad always had a little poem when he tucked me into bed at night. He would go, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, make the bed, shake the bed, and into bed you go. So they've always been on my mind, these guys. 3 times really fast, that's a challenge for afterwards with as many high shoes as you can manage in your mouth. Okay, anyway. So chapter 3 of Daniel, we've read how King Nebuchadnezzar has set up a golden idol. It's 60 cubits high. We didn't hear that in the reading. That's 17 of me, or 5 or 6 giraffes, or 19 and a half Mini Coopers. Just, for those who like to visualise how big this statue is. And hear the command of the king, which extends beyond people's identity, their nation, their tribe, and it's all-consuming. Let's hear that again. Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. And as we've read, this is what happens to our friends, but these 3 are faithful to the call of God to worship no one but him. And God has other plans for them. And I just want to stop for a moment and look at that bigger picture, because we've got to the book of Daniel, and as we have done so, we have reached the end of the Old Testament in the God Story book that many of us are doing as part of our small group. So we're halfway there, folks. Well done. And the book of Daniel describes events which take place from around 650 BC as the Hebrew people are taken into exile in Babylon. But it's actually written a lot later than that. It's written around 150 BC. And that's right in the middle of that great silence that Richard talked about last week, that 400-year gap in which God seems to go quiet before Jesus comes on the scene. And overall, it's a mad book. It's full of mad happenings. There are kings having wild dreams with statues with feet of clay, kings going mad and eating grass like a cow. There's ghostly hands writing on palace walls, and Daniel, a bit like Joseph, is called in to make sense of things. It's full of Daniel's own apocalyptic end times visions, many involving multi-horned goats. Kingdom after kingdom crashing down, which parallels known events like the rule of real people that we can identify, like Alexander the Great. Our own Archangel Michael makes an appearance. It's full of symbols and numbers, which Christians have probably spent far too long trying to unpick for clues about the future. It has all this creation imagery that harks back to Genesis and then leaps forward to Revelation. And Jesus draws from the book too. So in that way, it makes the perfect hinge book for this great silent moment in human history when everything seems quiet and God is about to do something extraordinary in Jesus. So as we reach the end of the Old Testament, I'm reminded of one of the questions that has come up repeatedly in my small group as we've looked at the span of history of God's people. And that question is just, why does humanity keep making the same mistakes over and over again? And it's a really great question. Because I'm a historian and I can't help myself, I'm going to put my historian hat on, and I'm just going to take you through an idea which might help explain some of that. There's this wonderfully named theologian. She has a name that's kind of like from the Magic Mr. Men books. Her name is Phyllis Tickle. It's a great name. She talks about this idea that every 500 years or so, the church and human history more broadly seems to undergo this sort of period of upheaval, and she calls this the rummage sale of history. So these periods are hinge moments in which everything shifts, nothing seems settled or true anymore, and something new is born out of those hinge moments. And I just thought it might be interesting, I think it's interesting, just to have a look at this idea and track it forward. You can track it backward too, but we don't have time to do that. So anyway, today we've got this story from 600, 500 BC, the Hebrew people in exile, they're captured and taken into Babylon. And as the God Story book says, they are as far away from Eden, they are as far east from Eden now than they ever have been. And they're wrestling with really deep questions about their identity. What's happened to the promised land? Wasn't there meant to be a king from the line of David forever? Has God abandoned his people? Huge questions. And as they return from exile through Nehemiah, as Jerusalem is rebuilt, through Isaiah and the prophets who speak of the servant king to come, they have to learn once more at that hinge point, what does it mean to be God's people? So we fast forward 500 years or so, and we find the people of God back in their homeland, but they are fracturing under the occupation of the Roman Empire. They've heard these stories of the Messiah, the Saviour. When will he come? What will that look like? And they're about to experience God himself walking among them, the greatest transformation of all of human history. Fast forward again, AD 500. We're at the fall of the Roman Empire. The Spirit of God has spread and Jesus' church has grown and survived and taken root. But how do God's people help that embed wherever they go? We see the advancement of the papacy, the popes becoming an institution. And we see the advancement too of the monastic orders, communities that embed the gospel story of God wherever they are. AD 1000. We're at the Great Schism when the Western and Eastern Orthodox churches went their separate ways. God's people are wrestling with how do Christians live as people who disagree so fundamentally. Another 500 years. We're at the Reformation. People are asking, why can't God's word be accessible to all people? We have the gospel translated into different languages, and from there, the great global missionary advancement begins. So, where are we now? We're around AD 2000-ish. We're another 500 years on. So, by Tickle's theory, we're probably in the middle of the next great rummage sale of church history. And I wonder if anybody feels like that is the case. I mean, I think I certainly do. Not only is Christianity on the decline as the formative part of Western culture, but there are huge challenges facing humanity. And it's hard to feel hope sometimes either about the role of the church or for humanity in general. And there's that new phrase that's emerged called permacrisis, that idea that we're just swinging from one crisis to the next. So what does any of this have to do with Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego, or that great question of why we keep doing what we do? I reckon we need to remind ourselves regularly that we're part of this bigger picture and we can't always know what God is up to, except to know that it will be good. And we have the choice to live like our friends in the book of Daniel, to stay strong, to stay true to kingdom values first and foremost, even if we don't understand the big picture. But as well as remembering that big picture, I think we also need to remember how important our individual lives are. The prophet Isaiah reminds us that all people are like grass. We're here today, we're gone tomorrow. And this is true, but in the span of 500 or so year periods in history, our lives are just a blink. But when we think that because of that our lives are not important, we run the risk of underestimating that beautiful gift of life that God has given us. Our contributions now are seen and they really, really matter. Jesus reminds us, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. Jesus knew our individual value enough to die for us. And knowing that our lives matter that much to God can really empower us to live fully for kingdom values despite what the culture is that surrounds us. For our heroes today, they didn't forget that their lives really mattered and they were not content to take the easy route for a quiet life. The same was true for Daniel as he refused to bow to King Darius and was thrown into that lion's pit. The sense of value that they placed on their individual identities as followers of God and their commitment to swimming against the cultural current despite the risk meant that God was able to demonstrate his power in their miraculous rescue, which resulted in the king's 180-degree turn and the protection of God's people. So what's the practical application for us now as ordinary people as we live our short but important lives in the midst of another hinge point of history? Here's a great quote from Paul in Romans chapter 12. With eyes wide open to the mercies of God, I beg you, my brothers, as an act of intelligent worship, to give him your bodies as a living sacrifice, consecrated to him and acceptable by him. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mould, but let God remold your minds from within. I love that line. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mould, but let God remold your minds from within. We follow this King Jesus, who is so different to the values of this world. An awesome, amazing King who embodies and calls us to pursue the awesome things of life: justice, peace, kindness, mercy, aroha, belonging, restoration, and transformation. And those are such great things in comparison to what the world has to offer us: cruelty, greed, mockery, cynicism, exploitation, self-serving, violence, indifference. It's the list that goes on. So I wonder what it means for us not to be squeezed into that world's mould, to hold on, to be steadfast. And for me, it looks like some of the following, and just hear that I'm not actually always making good decisions, but I'm trying. One of the ways I kind of sometimes try, or I do try to swim against the cultural current, is to try and make that decision not to watch that clip or that video or that program that doesn't add kingdom values to my life. Or I choose not to buy that thing that I probably don't need anyway, because I know it's made of something or in a way that doesn't bring life to God's creation. Or I might choose not to join in with mockery or cynicism or agree with statements I don't believe just to get on side with others. Or I might try to choose to spend more time praying or reading my Bible, even though there's other things I could be doing, because I know it will help me stay the course, and because, after all, I'm the one who gets to decide how I live my life. Just as I come into land, this week I was privileged to have a first look at the next video conversation that Bishop Justin has recorded with various Palestinian Christians, exploring what it means for them to follow Jesus as they live their daily lives in the Holy Land at this time. And this week he interviewed Dr. Lama Mansour. She is a young Palestinian Christian who was born and lives in Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, and she experiences oppression we can't even imagine. And Dr. Mansour is faithfully working out what it means for her to follow God as a stranger in her own land. Bishop Justin asks her how she carries on despite all that she lives through day by day as a second-class citizen of that land. And these are the words that have struck with me. I'm going to read them out. She says, "Our work is eternal. Our work is not fleeting. It's not passing. And it seems that way a lot of days, and a lot of days we fail, and a lot of days I find myself slipping into cynicism. But we remember that we're not doing this work for ourselves. We're not doing this work even for our people. We're doing this work for God. We're doing this work to become more human as God intended us to be." I think these words remind us again that as we partner with God to see his kingdom come on earth as in heaven, we're given lives of meaning and purpose that matter now and forever. So I just pray today that we too will be faithful to that call and stay the course, come what may. Amen.